The season of shadow. When the unseen walked among men, the air in the kingdom of deep night hung thick and cold, an eternal twilight where the very shadows seemed to possess substance. This was the domain of Lucifer, whose throne was carved from frozen fear and whose whispers shaped the machinations of the unseen realm. It was the season, a time prophesied in their dark chronicles, when the veil between the living and the dead would thin. The dark directive Lucifer addressed his legions, the unseen spirits, restless entities drawn to the sorrow and decay of the mortal coil. His voice was not loud, but carried the weight of ancient authority, reverberating through the abyssal courts. "The time is upon us," Lucifer declared, his form shifting between a blinding light and an impenetrable void. "The harvest is ripe. You shall go forth to the world of men. Your mission is singular and absolute. Possess every vessel, every fallen human body that remains unclaimed, that is not shielded by the light's covenant." He emphasized the caveat with a chilling grin. "Where the seal of the Almighty remains, you shall not tread. But the unprotected dead are ours. Inhabit them, walk as they walked, and sow the seeds of discord. Blend live among them. Let the world forget the difference between the flesh and the shadow within." The infiltration. Following the solemn, sinister decree, the unseen spirits mobilized. They surged across the fragile boundary, a silent, invisible tide seeking purchase on the mortal plane. They flocked to the places of final rest, the sprawling, moss-covered graveyards, the quiet corners of forgotten family plots, and the stark, cold surfaces of embalming rooms. They were drawn to the empty shells, the remains of those whose souls had departed without receiving the final blessing, or whose lives had been lived entirely outside the grace they scorned. One by one, the cold, inert vessels were filled. A sudden, unnatural warmth would momentarily touch the corpse. The eyes would flicker open with an alien, predatory intelligence, and the body would rise, alive in a terrible, borrowed sense. These possessed bodies, looking perfectly human, slipped away from their temporary tombs. They melted into the world, moving to distant cities, adopting new, easily fabricated pasts, and beginning their long, slow campaign of subtle sabotage within human society. The shadowed lives. The spirits proved masterful actors. They quickly learned the rhythms of human interaction. They held jobs, paid taxes, and most alarmingly for the kingdom of night, they integrated into the most intimate of human bonds. Many of the spirits, seeking the deepest possible roots, entered into marriage. They wooed unsuspecting partners, men and women who saw only a charming, perhaps slightly melancholic new spouse. They shared beds, celebrated holidays, and built homes, all while the entity underneath meticulously practiced its disguise. The demon spouses were often characterized by an unnerving intensity, a deep-seated coldness that only the most sensitive partners ever sensed, dismissing it as mere eccentricity or troubled past. They bore children, creating bloodlines that unknowingly carried the taint of the shadow. The unmasking. For years, the infiltration went unnoticed, its success measured in the slow erosion of trust and the quiet increase in human misery. Then came Minister Elias Thorne. He was a man steeped in the ancient texts, whose ministry was not one of comfort, but of vigilance. He noticed patterns that others missed, inexplicable bursts of spite in families, strange recurring nightmares that plagued whole neighborhoods, and a chilling lack of genuine empathy in certain respected community members. Minister Thorne began to preach on the peril of the unsanctified flesh. His sermons were not mere morality plays. They were detailed warnings, laced with prayers of deep, desperate authority. He spoke of the spiritual battle waged in the unseen realms and how sometimes the enemy wears the face of a trusted neighbor. One fateful evening, during an open prayer service held in the town square, a service he insisted be held outdoors under the open, non-canopied sky, Minister Thorne focused his attention on several prominent citizens who had recently moved to the area. He didn't shout or accuse. He simply spoke a sequence of sacred names and verses of uncompromising truth. He directed his fervent prayer not at the people, but through the air, targeting the parasitic essence controlling them. As the minister's voice reached its crescendo, invoking a power the spirits had been explicitly warned against, the carefully constructed illusions began to fray. The eyes of one of the town councilmen clouded over, not with human confusion, but with a milky, ancient malice. A woman who had married a kind farmer suddenly shrieked, a sound that was not human vocalization, but the tearing of dry parchment. In several places throughout the crowd, the possessed bodies convulsed violently, their borrowed flesh straining against the power, trying to eject the occupant. The secrets were exposed not by evidence or investigation, but by a direct confrontation with the divine authority that repelled them. The spirits could hold the disguise, but they could not withstand the unadulterated word wielded with faith. As Minister Thorne finished the final invocation, a palpable force, like a sudden high-altitude wind, swept through the square, yet the leaves on the trees barely stirred. The effect was immediate and devastating for the infiltrators. The possessed bodies crumpled. They did not die a natural death. They became instantly inert, the unnatural warmth fleeing their limbs. Controlling entities, violently ripped from their comfortable vessels, had nowhere to go. Unable to return to the kingdom of deep night until the appointed season had passed, and forcefully ejected from the protective confines of the dead bodies, they were banished from the mortal sphere entirely. A collective, silent evaporation occurred. Where the possessed stood or sat, there was only the empty, rapidly cooling shell of the deceased human body, now truly empty, returned to the earth. The unmasked demons, screaming soundlessly in a dimension only the minister could sense, were scattered, hurled back into the vast emptiness between realms, their mission an abject failure. The season of shadow ended as suddenly as it began, leaving the living stunned, grieving for the loved ones they had thought they knew, but ultimately safe under the renewed, fiercely protected boundary. The moment the unseen spirits were expelled, the intense, unnatural energy that had gripped the town square dissipated, leaving behind a profound, terrifying silence. Instead of chaos, there was petrified stillness. The scene was surreal. Dozens of still, pale human bodies lay scattered on the ground. These were not the bodies of the living, but the dead who had been walking among them. Minister Thorne, exhausted but resolute, quickly organized those who remained, the genuinely living, those shielded by faith or simply unselected by the spirits, to attend to the fallen. Identifying the unknown dead, the first wave of shock gave way to a heartbreaking task. Many of the bodies were recognizable as new residents or spouses, yet they bore the subtle signs of age and decay that had been unnaturally halted or concealed by the possessing spirit. Forensic reality quickly set in. These were bodies that should have been long buried, now returned to their original inert state.